Hello and welcome to Sound Librarian. I'm Stefan Schutz. Going back to an old game again. This was originally a PC game. We're going to have a look at the Xbox version, probably play it on Xbox 360. So PC, Xbox 360. I'm talking about Doom 2. Now why I chose Doom 2 over the original Doom is because personally I preferred Doom 2 and I think it had a little bit more in it. Doom 2 has got some very, very funky music behind it, and it's got some really interesting sound effects, a lot of which become very cliched. Doom 2 as a game also has incredible level design and is simply just a lot of fun. So let's go and have a listen to Doom 2 and find out what all the fuss is about. So I left that going for the entire level for a couple of reasons. One, because I wanted to make sure that everybody had a chance to have a good look and a good listen to Doom 2. I suspect that out of most of the people watching this video, there will be a lot of people who have never seen it at all, and a lot of people who may have seen it, but I suspect it probably will have been many years since you actually played Doom 2. The thing that immediately grabbed my attention when I went back and played it for this analysis is that this is a very, very old game with very, very basic graphics. You can't even look up and down. And yet there are some rather extraordinary complexities to the audio in this that I myself had completely forgotten. One of the things is that throughout that entire first level, the music was playing and the music continued to develop and develop and develop all the way through the level. Now you can actually see at the end of the level, it gives you a counter of exactly how long I was playing that level. It was 4.5 minutes roughly. In that time, the music didn't really loop. Now there were obviously looping sections, and I'm not sure exactly how they implemented the music, but the music developed over the course of time that I was playing it. So this is a very, very simple game from many, many years ago, and yet it had music that continued to develop throughout the course of a 4-minute playing of a level, rather than just simply loop. As I said, I suspect that there are sections within it that loop, and as you move through the game, it either adds layers onto it or it develops further. And this would have used a system, more than likely this used the mod tracking system or something similar, so that the music was written in probably a MIDI format and made use of the available sounds on the sound card or whatever you had. Despite that, I'm still really quite impressed with exactly how much the music developed, because compared with so many other games of this age and of this genre and of this time period, that really was quite remarkable. I remember many other games that I played back in the day of Doom 2, and so many of them would have very, very short, very repetitive looping cycles of music that would become very apparent quite quickly and frankly become quite annoying. So this is the first thing about Doom 2 that I think is really quite significant, is that the music is really, really quite interesting in how it's been implemented. Not to mention that there is a different track for each level. So there's been quite a lot of music written for this game, because there's quite a lot of levels. And that thematically it changes quite dramatically. In fact, there seems to be almost a samba rhythm going on whilst you're running around dodging fireballs from demons and shooting bad guys, which most certainly will have been a first for the game industry, but it's also, I think, quite possibly something I can say that I don't know that there are many games since that have used samba rhythms or rumba or whatever the particular denomination of that rhythm was. Now, from the sound design point of view, the other reason to listen to the first level all the way through is because within the confines of the first level, we've actually heard quite a lot of the sounds that you'll ever hear in this game. There are not a lot of them. There are sounds, of course, that we didn't hear for the additional weapons, because we only really heard a couple of the weapons in the first level. And we didn't hear all of the monsters. We did hear the sort of the humanoid ones, and we did hear the imps, which are the brown demons. So there are extra sounds for some of the other monsters and for some of the other weapons. But really, most of the interaction sounds to do with the environment and what we're going to get were presented to us all in the first level. Doom doesn't really have ambience as much. It has the sounds of things in the world which you interact with, and it has the music, and that pretty much makes up the entire audio environment. So it's quite a sparse audio environment in some ways, but there is also significance in that. One of the things that Doom 2 has, more so even than some games that are being produced today, is information being provided to you from the audio that you're hearing. Quite often there are secrets that are revealed, and the only cue you get whatsoever is you hear a door open somewhere off in the distance, and you can usually get some sort of indication of which direction it might be in by listening carefully. You get the indication of whether you have been spotted by enemies, sometimes even when you can't see them, because you hear the reaction. Now, sure, there are a lot of games these days that do this, but there are still games that don't do such a simple thing as communicating to the player that they have been spotted by having an appropriate sound. So in Doom 2, the sound isn't just simple sounds to accompany events. It is, in a lot of cases, critical information as to what's going on in the game. You know, in fact, this hole here that I'm looking at, so this situation here, I can hear the creaky sound of an imp, so I know there's one down there. I can hear that fireballs are being thrown, and I'm trying to work out where they're coming from. It's actually coming from behind me, because there's another hole behind me, which I've just fallen down, and there it is. But all of that information, the presence of the imps, the fact that they are engaging me with fireballs, was all through the audio cues. Doom was one of the first popular FPS style games, and it got so much right from day one from an audio point of view. You are provided with key, important information from the audio, and especially in an area like this. I can't see very well down here. I can see barely anything at all. You explode some barrels, you hear a monster cry out, playing its dying sound. You know that you have killed something down the end of the corridor, whether you can see it or not. And in fact, there's quite a large section of this game where the audio is the only feedback you get. You need to deal with what is up ahead of what I can hear, because often the levels are very, very dark and you have no other feedback other than the audio that's playing. So you complete a level, you're given some feedback as to how you've done. New level starts. New piece of music. Again, the information there is telling me I can barely see the monster that's on the corner there. Especially at this sort of resolution, it's a couple of pixels sticking out. If it isn't for the sound, you don't know whether you've successfully hit them or not. I don't think there are any sprites indicating that you've hit the creatures, and sometimes it's hard to see whether there's even an animation. So the sound cues that you're receiving in this game are absolutely critical to indicate the level of success you're having with shooting. Otherwise, you could just be firing off into the distance and not having any idea of your success or failure. Again, the sound of a panel opening up. More often than not, you'll hear it before you see it. So, Doom really is a very, very good balance of visual and audio cues, but because of the makeup of the game level design, the use of light and shade, and poor lighting in a lot of cases, more often than not, the sound is just critical to the gameplay. Right, now here, there are actually monsters down in that blue area. I knew about them for two reasons. One, because I could hear their ambient sounds, and there are no other monsters present, so there's a fairly good chance that there is something down there. Doom was one of the first games to introduce completely invisible enemies. Unless they are right up close to you, you cannot see them. So the only means I have here of targeting and shooting them is to point my rifle in a particular direction, pull the trigger, and hope to hear the sound that they make when they've been injured. And then ultimately, I'm waiting to hear, after that, the sound of them hitting the ground, falling over dead. And then finally, there is the cue that I'm no longer hearing their ambient sound, so it's fairly safe to assume that I have dispatched both of the invisible monsters. Now, this, again, is something that I've not seen in many games since Doom. There are very, very few games that have allowed the idea of an invisible enemy. So even a game that had such basic graphics as Doom was able to successfully introduce an invisible enemy by having a very distinct sound that you had to deal with. Very distinct sounds to indicate to you if you had successfully injured them or not, and if you had successfully killed them. So this entire little event that I've just been through has been entirely based on my ability to hear and deal with my opponent from what I could hear. Picking up some different power-ups here, and I get the different interface sounds associated with those, and of course the sound of the teleporter. The other thing about Doom 2 is this game has been around for so long and has been ported successfully across so many different platforms that most of the sounds in this game are now iconic. People have heard them again and again and again. In fact, the sounds of the imps are quite a cliched sound, because one of the sound effects used for the imp demons is a camel, and it's been overused in many Hollywood films. Also, the sounds of the doors opening. I find it quite amazing that this particular sound effect, which I'm not sure whether it was created by the people who worked on Doom. I don't believe it was. I believe it was out of a sound library. The sound of those doors opening, I have seen used again and again and again, or should I say I've heard being used again and again and again in high-budget Hollywood movies, which frankly I just find kind of lazy on their part. Using very, very old school sound effects from a sound library just seems to be a lack of inspiration on the part of their sound designers. So Doom has got sounds that have become cliched because they've been used outside of Doom and were general sound effects, but also some of its specific sounds have become very, very well known because of the popularity and how well known Doom is. See, interestingly, the piece of music on this level does seem to be just playing repeating pattern. At least it's repeating far more than the piece of music on the very first level did. So it might depend on which level you're playing and what pieces of music have been developed for that level. But the music on the first level was really quite interesting in that it just continued to develop during the course of that level. One of the other things I need to say about Doom 2, not so much related to its audio, but Doom 2 has some of the best level design I have ever seen. There are some very, very clever things that have been done with the levels in Doom 2 that really add considerably to its gameplay. And I believe that the next level we're about to look at actually bring some of those things up. And this is all part, I think, of the success of Doom 2. It's an extremely old game, and yet they got so many things right that games since have really kind of failed to do. Doom introduced a bunch of concepts with levels that was really, really quite clever. And this is one of the examples here. This room that you're seeing open up kind of has the impression that when you go around the corner, it's an extension of the same room. You can see you've cleared that room, you walk around the corner, and to the left there's another thing that opens and closes. And at first glance you think, oh, that's the room I just cleared. However, it actually isn't. There are more guys in there because it's another sub-room, it's a smaller room. And Doom's full of little ideas like this where what looks to be a room that from one angle, you look at it from another angle and a different setup. And so this really, really allows you to fall into the trap of being ambushed quite often. Doom also has the idea of when you think you're opening a door, you're actually not. You go up to what looks like a door and the floor will fall out beneath you. Now, obviously, once you know that this can happen, you can kind of prepare for it. But initially, it's a real surprise. And the Doom levels are full of ideas like this, where your assumptions about how a level has been put together are often challenged. It's not until you've worked out the full solution for a level that you understand some of the subtleties involved in how it's been put together, where some of the things that you're required to do once you're able to wander around and work out, oh, this was how I was supposed to do this level, there are subtleties within that design that are very, very effective. Now I'm being shot at here because now I've noticed there was a guy on the other side of that grill that I wasn't really seeing who was shooting at me. Because I could see that grill from where I started, but I couldn't see anybody there, so I made this assumption that the area was empty. Hidden passages that are revealed by subtle differences in the shapes and patterns on the walls. Sometimes the colors, sometimes where a light is on or not on, sometimes where a light is flickering, will often indicate where secret panels are. And it's done in a much more clever way than a lot of modern games are. So Doom 2 really doesn't have much in the way of a story. It's a very, very simple concept. Just get through the levels and survive. There's no dialogue. There's not really any narrative. It's just, effectively, it's a survival game. It's a run and gun survival game. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. The narrative is basically told through your actions, through the environment, through what you see. So there isn't much that you need to think about or deal with here from the point of view of story being presented. So really, the whole idea of the music providing the ambience, that works fine. And the limited number of sound effects do exactly what they need to do. They provide you with feedback that allow you to play the game effectively. All right, so that particular version was actually a version of Doom 2 that was on the disc, came on the disc of Doom 3. And I think there was also Doom 1 on there as well. And frankly, I still prefer Doom 2 to Doom 3. I think it's a far better game. This is an example where wonderful graphics and everything else, and even an attempt at storytelling, just doesn't stack up to the brilliant, clever level design of Doom 2. And frankly, in a lot of ways, some of the sound design in Doom 2, I think, just works better than Doom 3. I think sometimes games can get a little bit too overly complex and forget what it is that they're supposed to be doing. And primarily, they're supposed to be fun. So for me, Doom 2, lots of fun. and some interesting audio elements. I'm sure you can find a copy of it somewhere if you want to check it out. Please do. Thank you for watching.